Hello, everyone. This is The Lies That Bind Us. Um, I'm Maki Ash Van Steenwyck, and
And I'm
appreciate your
Kaylee Hargrove.
Before we dive into the lie that binds us for this episode, just want to remind everyone that we have some ways that you can support us or learn more about our work. Check us out at prophetikimagination.substack.com, and please subscribe. And if you are at a place where you can be a paying subscriber, that's great. Also, check us out on our social media, Instagram and Facebook mostly, at Prophetic Imagination. Um, there's a lot of crap going on in the world that we need protection from, wouldn't you say?
I would say so, depending on who is doing that protecting.
Well, I think that's the man's job. Men
Of
we
course,
need more men
we
stepping
need
up
more
to be
men
protectors. Uh,
because that is their God-given role
mhm.
to, to protect the women folk of the world.
And also children and the elderly and the
Yeah.
infirmed. Uh, just to kind of set this up, so we're talking about the myth of the male protector, or the man as the natural protector. Now, it's probably important to remind people of this. When we say something's a myth, we're talking about sort of a social narrative that has become naturalized. It's something that doesn't really get questioned a whole lot in mainstream society. That's kind of what a myth is. Doesn't mean that everything about the myth is false. There can be elements of truth to a myth, but the question is whether or not these different myths in our society, these different narratives, serve us or not, and what they're obscuring. So we're going to look at man as the natural protector. And when I start thinking about how to learn wisdom about masculinity, um, I I go to focus on the family.
Focus on the family.
So this is
Started by Dr. James Dobson, which,
yeah, I love.
by the way, was part of Ronald Reagan's like core group of people to study the effects of pornography. Um,
Oh, really?
do you know how they studied it? Oh my goodness.
No, I'm eager to know.
They they basically just consumed as much pornography from the shadiest places they could find and then like reported on the effects that they had. So like the groundbreaking research that like future research on pornography came from people like Dr. James Dobson uh, watching a lot of pornography and reporting the consequences of
Was that
that.
was it called Project Sticky Palms, or what was that?
Oh my goodness, I don't remember, but
Oh my
it
God.
was like a special counsel to Reagan. Like this is, oh my goodness, it's so bizarre. Anyways,
Thank you
this
for
is the
your
man who
service,
also,
James Dobson.
yeah,
Like, I love this. This is their website called Boundless, but the tagline is great. Find your place, focus your future. For a lot of people, it is, you know, stay in your place or know your place. But anyways, men be protectors. I'm just going to read a little bit and see what it sounds like. Now, obviously, this isn't an extreme example, maybe, but I mean, it's important for people to realize, especially if you're progressive. Um, Leftist type people like myself are statistically fringe. Uh, People who really are into focus on the family are statistically mainstream. So this isn't
yeah.
some sort
Focus
of
on the family is not some radical right. Like this is mainstream evangelicalism. Like they still put this stuff on the like K Love or K Light. So where I grew up, we had a K Light and a K Love. I don't remember. I
radio
forget which ones.
stations.
Yeah, radio stations.
Nice.
One was local, one was national. I think it's K Love that's national. But yeah, they'll put focus on the family stuff up like all the time. At least
Yeah.
when I was listening to, I don't listen to Caleb
Why?
anymore,
Why
and I
not?
haven't
Why
for
not?
years. So,
Why
you
not?
know,
That's. Do you hate wisdom? Um,
I I hate the same 3 chords played over and over
Mm.
that I don't actually like.
My local evangelical station is KTIS, which doesn't have any cool. It's not K Love or
K-tis.
KTIS. Okay,
K-tis.
so let me take a look at this. Okay, protection is a concept usually overlooked until there is a distinct lack of it, and then it is incredibly evident. Be protectors, men. Men are called to lead in love, such as Christ did. Ephesians 5:22-24. Okay, that is a huge responsibility. Leadership involves many elements: humility, foresight, courage, and empathy. They didn't get the memo. Oh, this is from 13 years ago.
This is
So
old,
empathy
yeah.
is a sin. Like, I don't know if they
Empathy
need
is
to,
still there.
yeah, to name some. That's a for anyone who wants to know what I was just referencing. Just type in empathy is a
Is
sin.
empathy a sin? Yeah, like, it's
Because apparently, our shadow prime minister Elon Musk, like a couple weeks ago, on Joe Rogan, called empathy um, one of the great mistakes of Western civilization, and there's a big push for that. It's usually
and
vilifying empathy usually goes hand in hand with a rise of fascism. But
yeah, and
that's
it's definitely not new at all. Because if you've been, an internet warrior or something, and have been on, like, Twitter or something, you'll see you've seen people talk about empathy being a negative for the better part of a year, at least. Maybe, I don't it could have been longer, I don't know, time is doesn't make sense to me anymore since 2020, and it's been a
yeah.
half decade since then, so, yeah.
This is
But yeah,
great.
it's a thing.
This is usually the tack. I think at least they're playing the classics here. Let's do a quick recap of Genesis 2 and 3. Adam and Eve and that whole fruit and snake situation. But it comes down to Adam failed to protect Eve, and the results were tragic. Sin entered in. Men should look at this passage and realize that man's role as protector is a serious one. As leaders, women are put into your care. If a woman is called to submit to you, then part of your job as a leader is to protect her. Women need different types of protection. Physically, that's the obvious one. Men are burly, like soldiers, protecting the women folk.
Apparently.
Emotionally, women are emotional beings. Sometimes it can be agitating. Trust me, we don't like it so much either. But it's the way God
Oh
created
my
us.
goodness, wait,
Oh,
so wait.
this is written by a woman. Boundless
What?
is like,
Oh my goodness.
okay, this is the women's magazine. That helps.
Oh,
We're emotional, and we need your protection from our own emotions. Then
so this
women.
this is a
Oh,
reminder that internalized misogyny is a thing,
yeah.
that, if you are groomed from childhood to think that your emotions as a woman are less than, you will believe that. And it's not necessarily that women have more emotions than men. Men are also groomed to be emotionally stunted and not show their emotions. Is both sides are incredibly unhealthy. Yeah.
Um. So we could see where that was going. So
Yeah.
physical protection, you need to protect women folk from physical harm, uh, protect them from their own irrationality through their emotions, and then protect women spiritually so that they do not fall into sin. Um, the assumptions there, like
Yeah.
usually, even if you talk to a progressive person, someone who doesn't necessarily assume that women are irrational and needing to have men protect them from sin, like those 2 points are easy to challenge. But
Yeah.
you'll still get a lot of people saying, well, men are physically stronger, and so they are the protectors. Um, and,
From
and
who?
so far, yeah,
The 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 question is definitely from who
I,
or
I,
whom? I'm not
I,
sure which one it
I
is.
will acknowledge that if you have a household, a typical household in the United States, and you hear glass break downstairs and there's a baseball bat next to the bed, whoever the two of like whoever's in bed, let's say it's your standard husband wife situation, whoever's the stronger and more effective at using a baseball bat would make sense to be the one to go check out the danger. Like, so I grant that there's something to that. That's where the myth isn't entirely wrong,
Yeah,
but it's a bimodal distribution, folks. There are
yeah,
plenty of relationships where uh, the woman is physically more capable of wielding a baseball bat. But that's not really what this is. That's not the scenario where we always like coming up with these extreme situations, but this idea of the protector being part of a man's
like,
definition
yeah.
is troubling. And that's what we want to talk about.
Which,
Because
which to be
protect from who?
this
Whom?
this does make me think, like, how often, like, I've only existed in women's spaces for about 5 years now.
Hmm.
In those 5 years, I have yet to need a man to physically protect me from something.
Hmm.
When I presented as a man, there was never really a time when I needed to physically protect a a woman. Um, I don't like, there is definitely this idea that men have to be ready to protect at all times, but it's something that is rather kind of rare. Um, because the truth is, like, you are probably more likely to end up in an abusive domestic relationship than you are to be like randomly physically assaulted in in a space in which it is a woman and a man and the man is there to step in. Um
Yeah.
it's just, yeah, statistics say that that is unlikely. Like, you're more unlikely to be like mugged if you're with another person. It's normally whenever you are alone. But in
Hmm.
actuality, you probably have a higher chance of being domestically abused from a partner than a random person.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like protection, this idea of that we all have moments or um, times where we're vulnerable and we need someone to have our backs. That's kind of what community is for. And there are men in community, so it makes sense in that context that some of the men might be protectors in a situation. But this idea of this intrinsic role is a really complicated idea because what it does, if you peel back the layer, you ask, well, like, what does this role mean? Like to me, protection, just like when we think about uh, the police to protect and to serve, they don't. I don't want to get into policing myths, but the police don't have to protect you. It's not. They're not legally required.
Yeah,
It's not. It's
they've
not their
been
job.
they've been let off the hook from, like, lawsuits whenever they could have intervened and they chose not to.
Yeah,
So
it's not their
police
actual
job is not
job.
to protect.
It's not their job. And also, in the military, you could say its fundamental job is security and protection. But again, in our society, um, that's not really what they do. And in the same way, I think there's, if we kind of follow that logic, this, what does having protect and serve on the side of a police car do? It obscures some of the things that they are doing by legitimizing their need for ability to use force. Same with
Mhm.
military, defend our freedoms by repeating that sort of thought terminating cliche. Then there's all sorts of other stuff that we don't pay attention to. Same with man as protector can be kind of this
Mhm.
cover for control. It's a
A-
justification for control.
In for both police and for military, and it'll
Hmm.
apply to the idea of men as protector, they they do protect, but they protect generally property or infrastructure or
Hmm.
means of, like, capital.
Hmm.
Like, that's why we criticize the military or make jokes about, oh, they found they found oil in uh Australia. It sounds like they need freedom or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
we make jokes about it, because the truth is that's kind of accurate, and so we make jokes about it because like dealing with the accuracy of that statement is kind of rough to deal with. But also, we see it all the time that police are there to protect property, and we've seen that with police protecting a Tesla dealership from protesters.
Mhm.
Uh, that same concept of protection is ultimately kind of the fundamental reason why our society views men as needing to be protectors, because it is not necessarily for the safety of women. It's because women are seen predominantly as the property of men, and so
Mhm.
protection is really uh about protecting property, not
Yeah.
protecting like actual humans. And like that becomes apparently clear whenever we look at the way that our political system is set up, and how things like women's rights are constantly being targeted and not protected by
Mhm.
the very people that are saying that a man's role is to protect. Um, if it's to protect, then it needs to go outside of physical violence, because that that's kind of stopping physical violence while creating violence through politics is not necessarily protection.
No, I mean, this is kind of how the logic works. If someone's deemed a protector, um, they have the authority to determine what constitutes a threat and how to respond to it.
Mhm,
And so um, it really becomes more about having the power to determine threats than it does with protecting. So uh, certain patriarchal societies will treat women's autonomy as a threat.
mhm. And this is
Um,
predominantly true, like, uh, a lot of, especially feminist, researchers within the, witch hunts and witch trials, like, recognize that they weren't actually about a fear of witchcraft. It was actually social dehumanization of women's autonomy, and a means to eradicate women who uh, didn't fit into what was expected within the patriarchal norm. And that especially came from like older women who had to fend for themselves and found ways to, like, make money, stuff like that. Um, were seen as witches because uh,
they're
they,
outside of the protection
they
of acting
yeah.
outside of the yeah,
And
yeah.
so because they were outside of the norm, then the other women who were inside of the norm needed to be protected from them, and so they were, deemed witches, right?
Mhm.
Like
Yeah, and if we continue with the sort of the social function of protection, and we were talking about military and the police, those are the protectors are the ones who get to use violence.
mhm,
That's the other thing. Uh, and when you have a monopoly on violence, um, it doesn't go well, and especially
no, it
because
doesn't.
then you get to justify your violence as a protective act. Domestic abuse survivors frequently report that their abusers frame their violence as a form of protection.
Yeah,
Abusers often think that their abuse is an extension of their protection, which is kind of fucked up.
yeah.
Military thrives on that logic. Nations thrive on that logic. Um, they become the threat, but they're justified because there's a worse threat. Um, and then
So I just looked this up.
okay,
Uh, so, um,
you're close.
according to, Oregon legislature, um, Uh, two studies have found that at least 40% of police officers' families experience domestic violence.
And that's what we know of.
That's what we know of.
So there's hidden abuse. That's kind of what there's a lot of
Mhm.
that too.
And so it becomes this thing of the protector, because of their position in society as protector, like you said, gets to choose when violence is necessary. And That does include in a weird rational way, like, uh, in order for me to keep you safe, you must listen to me because I am in charge. If you do not listen to me, then violence is justified to keep you in line because it is my job to keep you safe.
Mhm.
That ultimately, if you remove morality from it, that's kind of a logical thought, right? The the truth is it's really messed up, and it's an abusive cycle. The truth is, um, men aren't actually supposed to be rulers of women, which that's an entire theological thing that we could,
Mhm.
get into. Um, but ultimately, like, that type of logic is a natural outcome from this concept of male protector within a patriarchal system.
Mhm. Well, and the flip side is if men are the protectors and therefore women and children and maybe the elderly and whatever are the protected, there's then becomes this idea that women are intrinsically vulnerable
Mhm,
in a way that men aren't. Um, and so once you start having a framework like this, then uh, vulnerability becomes feminized. And all of a sudden you have this idea, man as protector almost forces this idea of the weak woman.
yeah, it does.
It, and I can imagine that there are men who feel a certain sense of their identity is wrapped up in being a protector. And in some ways, I don't want to challenge that too much if it's coming from a place of, I love people in my life and I want to take care of them and protect them from harm. I think that's a beautiful sentiment. I feel that way. Every
I don't that's not
every
Yeah,
generative adult should feel that way.
that's
Um,
and that's not inherently masculine either. Like,
no, the reason mama bear is a term that's
it's
used.
because that's actually a rather feminine trait to be
Yeah,
protective.
yeah, and really, something messed up happens when you extract things that are supposed to be social functions and then pour them into individuals. So this
Mhm,
idea that the nuclear family is a microcosm of society with a mom and dad and children, and then uh, the man is the protector, the woman is the one who keeps the home and tends the children, and then you cast that large. I'm like, that's a weird way of thinking because really
mhm.
community is the protector, mutual aid, having each other's back. These sorts of things are valued by lots of people everywhere, even if they don't have a patriarchal society. We don't need
But
patriarchy.
but Ash, if we had an understanding of community that went that way, then we wouldn't be able to uphold our capitalistic systems that prey on the individuality of people and families.
That's true.
Yeah,
I didn't think that
we
through
have to
enough.
maintain the capitalism.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um, well, and then, there's also then this piece of what this does to men,
Mhm,
because, we're going to talk at some point about this idea that there is a crisis of masculinity
the
happening.
the
Um,
crisis of masculinity that is coinciding at the same time of hyper, like, a pandemic of male loneliness.
yeah, and there's truth to that. And we're not doing an episode on that right now, but it does connect. So that's why I wanted to bring it up. Like, if you're socialized to have to be a protector, um, and there's things that usually go with it. Not every society isn't the same, but so let's just talk about
We talk
kind of
about
the generic
Western or American society.
Western kind of European sort of sentiments. Um, Protectors have to be a little bit more stoic,
Mhm.
especially if part of your job is to protect women from their own emotions, then you have to be
Yeah,
uh,
you can't have
detached
emotions
and,
then.
and
Yeah,
objective. Um,
and fully logical. Everything you do must be just logic and no
yeah,
emotion.
and if you feel afraid at all, man, you need to be ashamed of that fear. You have to posture. There's so much about toxic masculinity is just kind of the outpouring of this assumption of the
Mhm.
great protector. Um, and it's isolating. This is what it does. It isolates men who do not. No one can fit into this perfect, um, gentle-hearted warrior trope. Um, and so it comes out sideways in all kinds of ways, like abuse. If you're stressed out because you're suppressing your emotions all the time and because you're protecting women from their emotions, and you can't allow yourself to feel fear, and you can't allow yourself to express vulnerability, and you always have to be ready to defend and attack.
Mhm.
That messes with you, and that's a lot of abusiveness is charged with that kind of energy of shame that's coming out
Yeah.
sideways.
And that's why, like, a lot of things have shown that things like sexual assault tends to be a lot less about attraction or sexual orientation, has a lot more to do with power.
Hmm.
And especially in a society where men are supposed to be seen as powerful, um, when they don't feel powerful, some will seek uh, to display their power on somebody else through sexual abuse. And that's why I I have it pulled up, but 93.6%, according to a study in 2001, so 4 years ago now, 93.6% of people arrested for sexual assault were men. That is significantly higher than
Hmm.
what it should be. Like, uh, ideally, there would be no there would be no like violence against other people. However, it should probably accurately reflect the population. And the truth is, there's like 51% of the population are um, assigned female, and 49% are assigned male. So the male demographic is highly um, overreaching on that, to maintaining like that
Hmm.
balance of where things that should be.
Hmm.
And that also plays into the idea of the protector, because in a lot of ways, if you put the emphasis on it is men's job to protect, especially through violence, then it ignores the fact that we do, in fact, have a societal systemic issue of violence that is predominantly being carried out by male presenting people. I- And instead of addressing the systemic issue that leads to that, we are promoting violence as the solution, which ultimately makes it
Hmm.
kind of worse.
It
So,
reinforces. It becomes a vicious
yeah,
cycle.
yeah. And so really it's the idea of the male protector in the law, it does not actually solve the issue of violence.
Mhm. It just reinforces, like, this sort of hierarchy of masculine hierarchy and creates this thing where you have to kind of, um it's a little bit like the butter side up, butter side down,
Mhm,
Dr. Seuss book where it just becomes escalating forms of violence, and we
mhm,
see that societally, and also we see that with men, like, uh, I suppose back in the day, in the '50s, um, male protectors didn't necessarily feel like they had to learn how to be mixed martial artists to be a protector, right? There's this
yeah,
escalating of what manhood has to be in order to defend against the growing threats in our world. Um, and so these myths obscure, like, if the function of a myth is to kind of help organize society, right? That's
mhm,
kind of, um, but by its very nature, it clips off everything that doesn't fit within the myth.
yeah,
So if we peel back the myth and see what's underneath, you see that, well, hey, if you're assigned male when you're born and you grow up thinking of yourself as a boy and then a man, um, y- there's all sorts of ways that men would naturally develop and grow and flourish that are cut off from them
yeah.
because they are instead focusing on being a protector. Like,
Well,
as someone who's
also,
yeah, go ahead.
oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you go for it.
Yeah, I just the idea of male protector, like from if you tear it back to the origins of it, there is um a certain societal benefit to having that understanding, especially in more ancient times, because
Mhm,
whenever the ability to protect physically through violence was more part of everyday life, like there were societies that did have women fight wars alongside men, and they were honestly, from records that we've seen, they were just as strong, if not stronger. The issue is whenever you end up killing women, they're the ones who give birth to the next generation. And
mhm,
so you could kill like one man and that's not going to affect future generations. But if you kill one woman, you're cutting off a strand of future generations. So
mhm,
like pure statistics, it makes sense to I mean, honest, this probably isn't the best way to look at it, but men were kind of the pawns in that because they weren't needed to maintain society as much as women.
mhm,
Um, in that allowed certain societies to grow and to become civilizations and to flourish. We don't necessarily need that anymore. Basically, I would say basically since the time of the invention of the gun, we probably did not need phys more physically, fit people for at least for everyday life. I understand, like, uh, Delta Force is,
mhm,
different than an average person, but, um, that's that's an extreme. That's not an everyday person type thing. Um, eh, we don't need that level of protection anymore, and we could actually take that as an opportunity for to explore like the full spectrum of masculinity within society, but we kind of choose not to in within the United States. Uh, I think a lot of that has to do with there's a lot of money in selling this version of violent masculinity. And um like we kind of just saw that over the weekend whenever the guy that's on Meta's board that owns UFC like welcomed the Tate brothers who
or
are
sexual predators.
there's sexual predators and publicly speak about being violent towards women, uh being welcomed at a UFC event where the purpose is to highlight violence. I do get that UFC has expanded and there are a lot more women matches, which is honestly is kind of cool. I would prefer watching the women matches than the men, but
Mhm.
that's besides the point. Um,
And then
but
that
yeah,
opens
we
the
we
door to, like, when you bring in the Tate brothers, there's this
yeah.
whole thing we haven't even talked about, like, uh, alphas and sigmas and who's
Mhm.
being cucked and all this sort of what we think of as toxic masculinity that's obvious to most people, that it's toxic. We haven't even talked about that because even just the garden variety stuff about
Yeah,
masculinity, um, is toxic in ways that we need to talk about. It's not
yeah.
just that the problem isn't just that certain men become predatory, otherwise being a protector is good. It's just there's a lot wrapped up into this idea of being a protector.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
in our society, capitalism, which is about possession
Our
and
true
ownership
God.
and control, and there's hierarchy and all that sort of stuff. Believing these myths kind of keeps us from having a deeper understanding of what protection really is, which is
Mhm.
mutual aid, uh, community defense in a sense that more in the kind of lefty activistic scene is that where you have security culture and you're watching each other's backs and it's non-hierarchical because there's group decision making and some people are tasked with certain kinds of functions, but it's not intrinsic, it's not innate.
Yeah.
It isn't the guy with the biggest muscles is the protector of the group. Because, like you said, that doesn't really matter anymore.
Yeah.
You think about in Rojava, the Kurds in Rojava, there are men and women uh, soldiers protecting because uh, you don't win battles by having arm wrestling contests. It's
Mhm.
not how it works. There's all kinds of ways of protecting. Um, and if we start splitting it between masculine and feminine ways of protecting, you just have to ask, like, what does that even mean anymore?
Yeah.
And I get it's unsettling to somehow take these historic categories of what constitutes a man and pull them out. Then people say, like, well, what is the difference between man and women anymore? I'm like, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Gender's
That's
kind of a bit of a construct, isn't it?
yeah. That's what you end up finding out is gender is a construct that we have put on our society. Uh, what you said about communal protection does remind me of our previous episode with Benji where we talked about wokeness and
Mm-hmm.
how stay woke started as like a call to like communal vigilance and communal
Yes.
defense.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and white people did not like that.
Yeah.
um, eh, which, yeah, there's probably a lot that could be said
It's
about that. Like,
because there's an assumed threat, and like
yeah,
if you're staying woke, um, within that framework, the threat is white supremacy and the
mhm,
cops and these different things that were a threat to black flourishing. And like white people in power in particular didn't like that framing of that being the threat.
yeah,
So really, every time someone talks about being a protector, it's important to ask, protect from what? What are the perceived threats? How do you define them? And who gets to
mm,
have say over what the threats are? And you'll
yeah,
find pretty quickly um, what that group of people values most and who has the power.
yeah.
That's
And
how we
also
interrogate
ask
it. Yeah.
what exactly are they protecting?
Hmm.
And because normally uh, it ends up becoming an ideal that they have. So,
They're protecting
like,
ideals rather than actual
yeah,
persons,
yeah,
because then they have to be accountable to those persons.
yeah, or they're protecting property. But that's
Yeah.
also baked into an ideal.
Like
Yeah,
Tesla's, what is it? Swastikars.
the swastikas. Yep.
Hmm. Yeah. So uh, the takeaway, I just kind of just to maybe land this plane. Um, to me, I think it's beautiful to have a desire and an impulse to protect those around us. I just think it's important to strip away a bunch of the assumptions that often come with that in our toxic system and
Mhm.
instead focus on what matters to me, what matters to us, why does it matter, and how do we take care of that? Like that's instead of starting with this
Yep.
essentialist idea of I'm a man and I have to protect. I am by definition a protector, um, and and then all the machismo that goes with it.
Yeah.
Um, that is counterproductive to actual thriving and flourishing most of the time.
Mhm.
So that's kind
It
of to me that
yeah.
we should all be protecting one another because we're should be supporting one another and mutual aid and having each other's back.
Because kind
Uh,
of ultimately, and I know that this is like an ideal that probably won't ever be realized. However,
mhm,
it is still an ideal that we should be working towards.
mhm,
Um, we should be working towards a society that doesn't need protectors at all. And so
mhm,
that takes dealing with systemic systemic issues that instead of just quick fixes to an issue that is like right in front of my face, you have to go to the origin and the root of what's causing that individual like problem in your face. And
mhm,
so ultimately the work isn't do violence now to stop violence from happening. It's dealing with the systemic issues that are leading to the violence in the first place. And it's much more difficult work. In a lot of ways, the men are protectors is a lazy way to get out of the fact that society needs to fix some actual issues.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So do you have any thoughts about what we want to talk about next time? Myths?
Next. Oh, I don't know.
Wait,
I am
and
getting
by the
ready
way,
for
anybody's watching this, feel free to if you have some social myths you want us to tackle, put them in the comments, and there's a good chance we'll take them on. I mean, this is
yeah,
still a
we did
fresh show.
get
Yeah.
we did get at least one comment, and we did write it down. But
Good.
we haven't exactly planned further than this episode right here. So,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
it is
So help us out. Give us ideas. And just as
Yeah.
a reminder, before we end up fading out here, Substack, prophetikimagination.substack.com. We put articles out pretty much every week.
Mhm.
These episodes are obviously going to be archived there as well. Also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Prophetic Imagination, and subscribe to our channel, The Lies That
Yeah.
Bind Us. We're
Definitely
really
subscribe on YouTube, because that'd be awesome to make it to.
we want to monetize.
Yeah,
we
we
need
want to
a
monetize.
little money. We need to, food costs money, especially those eggs these days. I guess that's all I hear about.
I see every single day it takes more monies to buy food.
To live. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Well,
so in a way to help us get some more monies without you necessarily giving us your monies, which donations are also awesome, and we do have a link for that in places. But
yeah.
subscribing to help us get to that.
Subscribing costs you nothing except for
Yeah.
the exertion of using your finger to click. That's all it takes, and it helps us a little bit. So, with that, we'll see you next time with our next myth.
Awesome. Bye.